The trading post was crowded that cold afternoon, the kind of day when frost clung to the doorway and the smell of wood smoke mingled with sweat and horses. Clara Dunn had come for flour and lamp oil, but she stopped cold when she heard the shouting. Near the counter, a boy, no more than 10, stood frozen, a small loaf of bread clutched to his chest. His hair was long and black, his eyes wide with the kind of fear that made Clara's heart twist. A half-drunk foreman named Wade Barrick had the boy by the collar, his voice booming. "Caught him with my goods. Thief's gotta learn." The crowd pressed closer, some curious, others hungry for spectacle. The storekeeper tried to calm Wade, but the man yanked the boy forward toward the door. 10 lashes, Wade growled. "Outside, in front of everyone, so he don't forget." The boy said nothing, only gripped the bread tighter. Clara could see his thin frame trembling. She stepped forward before she had time to think. "That's enough," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Wade turned, eyes narrowing. "Enough?" "He stole from me. You think you can talk me out of it?" Clara's pulse pounded in her ears, but she held her ground. "If there's punishment, give it to me." The crowd went still, and someone laughed nervously. "You'd take 10 lashes for an Indian brat?" Wade's lip curled. "Why?" Clara glanced at the boy, those wide eyes staring at her like she was something he couldn't name. "Because he's a child, and because you're a grown man." Wade's face darkened, but there was something in the challenge of her voice that made him push harder. "Fine," he sneered. "We'll see if you keep your word." He shoved the boy toward the counter, taking the bread from his hands and tossing it aside. "Out front," he barked at Clara. She walked ahead of him, her legs steady though her stomach was in knots. Outside, the cold bit at her skin, the boards of the porch creaking under her boots. Wade called for someone to fetch the whip, and a man from the crowd handed it over without meeting her eyes. Clara took off her coat, folded it over the railing, and stood straight. She would not flinch. She would not give Wade the satisfaction. The first lash cracked through the air, the pain searing across her back. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. By the 5th, her knees wanted to give, but she stayed upright. By the 10th, the boy was gone from the doorway. She didn't know if he'd run or been taken. All she knew was that the world had gone strangely quiet, except for Wade's satisfied breathing and the murmur of a crowd that didn't know what to make of her. The wind had shifted overnight, bringing with it the sharp bite of snow. Clara woke to the sound of it brushing against the cabin walls, a low whisper through the pines. Her back throbbed with each breath, the welts stiff and hot beneath her shirt, but she pushed herself up, stoked the small fire, and set water to boil. She was reaching for the flour sack when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow. Measured. Not the hurried clatter of passing travelers, but the deliberate approach of men who had chosen to come here. Clara stepped to the window, lifting the edge of the curtain. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, their horses dark against the snow. The men were tall in the saddle, their hair long, their coats trimmed with beadwork that caught the pale light of morning. Each carried a rifle slung across his back, and each face was set with the stillness of men who had already decided their purpose. Lakota. Clara's breath caught. She had seen enough of the world to know such visits were never by accident. The lead rider raised a hand in greeting, not slowing until he was within 10 yards of her cabin. Clara's instinct told her to bolt the door, but something in his eyes, not soft but steady, held her in place. She opened it instead. "You are Clara Dunn?" His English was careful, accented, each word deliberate. She nodded. The other 2 dismounted, leading their horses to the rail without a sound. The leader's gaze dropped to the faint red stains on the snow by her porch, where she'd hung her shirt to wash the night before. "Yesterday," he said, "at the trading post. You took the punishment." It wasn't a question. Clara swallowed, unsure what answer to give. It wasn't right. He's just a boy. A flicker passed over the man's face, something that might have been approval. He stepped closer, pulling something from his saddlebag. Wrapped in a piece of deerskin was the loaf of bread she'd seen yesterday, still whole. "He is my nephew," the man said. "You carry his pain now? That makes you family?" Clara stared at the bread, unsure what to say. "I don't expect—" "It is not a gift," the man cut in. "It is a debt, and debts are not left unpaid." He glanced toward the trees. "Wade Barrick has called for you. His men will come. We will be here first." The weight of his words settled heavy between them. Clara realized this wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Clara tried to busy herself that morning, sweeping the porch and hauling in firewood, but the presence of the 3 Lakota warriors made every movement feel watched, not in suspicion, but in quiet protection. They stood apart from each other, scanning the tree line, their rifles never far from hand. The leader, who had named himself Chayton, leaned against the porch rail, eyes narrowing toward the valley road. Clara's back burned with each bend and lift, but she refused to let the pain slow her. If Wade Barrick sent men, she wouldn't be seen as hiding behind anyone, even these men who had come unasked to her door. By mid-morning, the crunch of wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves carried up the road. Chayton straightened, his voice low. 4 riders, 1 wagon. Clara stepped beside him, her stomach knotting when she recognized the squat, wide-shouldered figure in the lead. Wade himself, his face set in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The wagon stopped just short of the porch. "Morning, Clara," Wade drawled, tipping his hat. "Heard you had visitors." His gaze slid past her to the warriors, a flicker of contempt crossing his face before he masked it. "We got business, you and me. Best send your friends on their way." Chayton didn't move, his presence like a wall between Wade and the porch. "Your business ended yesterday," he said, his words sharp but calm. Wade chuckled, though the sound was tight. "You think you can step into Dry Creek and take what's mine without me answering? She's still got debts, and she still belongs to this town's law." Clara stepped forward before Chayton could answer. "You don't speak for the law, Wade. You speak for yourself." His smile thinned. "Law says what I pay to enforce. You got one chance to come down and settle this quiet." The warriors didn't shift, but Clara felt the tension in the air like a storm gathering. Chayton's hand rested lightly on the stock of his rifle, his eyes never leaving Wade. "Go back," he said evenly, "before the snow takes more than your pride." For a moment, Wade just sat there, the leather reins creaking in his grip. Then he spat into the snow, flicked the reins, and turned the wagon. "We'll talk again," he called over his shoulder. "Sooner than you think." Clara watched them disappear down the road, her pulse still racing. She turned to Chayton. "He's not going to stop." Chayton's gaze followed the fading wagon tracks. "Number which means neither will we." The afternoon passed under a sky the color of pewter, the air heavy with the promise of snow. Clara went about her chores, though every creak of the cabin walls and snap of a branch outside set her nerves on edge. The 3 warriors moved like part of the landscape, silent, watchful, blending into the pines. Chayton circled the clearing more than once, studying the ground as if reading words written in the snow. Just before sunset, he returned to the porch, his expression unreadable. "Tracks," he said simply. "2 men on foot, coming from the valley. Clara's breath caught. "Wade." Chayton shook his head. "Scouts. They watch the house, waiting for night." He stepped past her into the cabin, speaking quickly in Lakota to the others. One of the younger warriors slipped off toward the ridge without a sound, while the other positioned himself at the cabin's rear window. Chayton took down his rifle from where it leaned by the hearth. "We make them leave before they think they can enter." Clara's back still ached from the lashes, but fear overrode the pain. "What do you need me to do?" He glanced at her, as though weighing how much to trust. "When I call, you light the lamp in the front window. Bright. They'll think we can see them in the dark." As the last of the daylight bled from the sky, the forest seemed to grow closer, the trees pressing in. The snow began to fall, thick and slow. Clara waited inside, eyes flicking between the window and the doorway. Somewhere out there, hidden in the growing shadows, men crouched with their breath steaming in the cold. A soft whistle cut through the air, Chayton's signal. Clara struck the match, the sulfur sharp in her nose, and touched it to the lamp wick. The warm glow filled the cabin, spilling out through the window like a beacon. Almost instantly, movement flashed at the edge of the tree line, a man darting back as if the light had burned him. A second figure bolted the other way. Then came the sound of Chayton's rifle, a single crack that rolled through the valley like thunder. Silence followed. Moments later, he stepped back into the cabin, snow clinging to his coat. "They're gone," he said. "For now." Clara let out the breath she'd been holding, but the look in his eyes told her the truth. The scouts would return, and next time they wouldn't be alone. Chayton glanced toward the dark forest. "Wade's coming. We'll be ready." Snow fell steadily through the night, blanketing the clearing in a muffled hush. Inside the cabin, the fire's glow cast long, slow-moving shadows on the walls. Clara sat at the table, wrapping her fingers around a tin cup of steaming tea Chayton had brewed from pine needles. Its sharp, resinous scent was foreign, but the heat chased the ache from her hands. The two other warriors spoke quietly in Lakota by the hearth, their voices low and even. Clara couldn't understand the words, but the cadence was steady, like men making plans they knew they would follow through on. Chayton sat across from her, methodically running a cloth along the barrel of his rifle. "They'll wait until the wind dies," he said finally. "Snow makes it hard to move quiet, even for them." Clara looked at him over the rim of her cup. "How many will he bring?" "As many as he can pay," Chayton replied, "but not enough to take this cabin without loss." His calm tone was more unsettling than any threat. She set the cup down, her fingers tracing the rough grain of the table. "Why does it matter to you? Protecting me? You don't even know me." He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "You took pain that wasn't yours. My nephew will remember that all his life. So will I." She wanted to answer, but something in her throat tightened, so she looked away instead. The younger of the warriors rose and stepped outside to check the perimeter. The cold swept in briefly through the open door, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint crunch of snow under his boots. The older warrior stirred the fire, sending sparks drifting upward. Chayton leaned back in his chair, setting the rifle aside. "Rest while you can," he said. "When the wind stops, they'll come." Clara nodded, though she knew sleep would be slow to find her. She stood, meaning to retreat to the small bed in the corner, but paused at the window. Beyond the frost-etched glass, the snow reflected the moonlight so brightly it seemed the whole world was made of silver. Somewhere out there, Wade's men were waiting, crouched in the dark, counting the hours until they could move. Clara's back twinged, the memory of each lash still etched deep into her skin. She thought of the boy's face, wide-eyed at the trading post, and felt a spark of steel settle in her chest. If they came, she wouldn't just hide. She'd stand. The wind outside eased, almost imperceptibly, and Chayton's gaze lifted toward the door. It won't be long now. The wind fell silent in the hours before dawn, leaving the forest so still that every creak of the cabin's timbers sounded like a warning. Clara lay on the narrow bed, eyes open, the blanket pulled to her chin. The quiet pressed against her ears until she heard it, a faint crunch of snow somewhere beyond the walls. She sat up slowly. Chayton was already standing near the door, rifle in hand, his silhouette tall in the fire's dim glow. The older warrior at the rear window raised 2 fingers, then pointed toward the ridge. Shapes moved there, dark against the pale snow, slipping from tree to tree. Clara's heartbeat quickened. The younger warrior eased in from outside, his breath showing white in the cold. 5 men, he murmured in Lakota. Chayton nodded once. 2 for the back, 3 for the front. He turned to Clara. Stay low. Do not move unless I tell you. She crossed to the hearth and crouched, the iron poker within reach. Outside, the snow whispered under boots as the attackers crept closer. The first came from the side, crouching low with a pistol drawn. Chayton's rifle cracked, the muzzle flash lighting the porch for an instant. The man fell into the snow without a sound. Shouts went up from the trees. Another figure broke cover, rushing towards the door. The older warrior fired from the rear window, and the man spun, dropping his rifle before collapsing in the drift. Clara's hands tightened on the poker. Through the front window, she saw Wade himself step into the clearing, his coat collar high, his revolver gleaming in the moonlight. He didn't rush. He simply walked forward, his boots leaving deep impressions in the snow, his gaze fixed on the cabin. You've got something of mine, Clara, he called, his voice smooth as oil, and I've come to collect. Chayton didn't answer. He moved to the side of the door, signaling silently to the others. Wade stopped 10 yards from the porch, tilting his head like a man deciding how best to kill. Send her out, and maybe I let the rest of you live. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Then Chayton's voice came, calm and certain. She's not yours. She never was. Wade's smile twisted, and he raised his revolver. Then you die first. Before his finger tightened on the trigger, the younger warrior slipped from the shadows behind him, knife flashing in the pale light. Wade turned at the last instant, but too late. The fight was on. Wade jerked away from the knife slash, his revolver barking twice into the snow. The younger warrior rolled clear, coming up with his blade ready, while Chayton fired from the porch, forcing the other 2 attackers to dive for cover. Clara pressed herself against the wall, the heat of the hearth at her back, and the cold dread of the fight ahead. One of Wade's men broke from the trees on the left, rushing the porch with a shotgun. Chayton turned to meet him, but another shadow came from the right, a man with a hatchet aiming for the doorway. Instinct took Clara before thought could stop her. She grabbed the iron poker and swung hard. The blow caught the man's wrist, the hatchet flying into the snow as he cursed and lunged at her. She jammed the poker into his ribs, shoving him back towards the open door where Chayton's boot caught him in the chest, sending him sprawling outside. Gunfire roared from the back of the cabin, the older warrior holding off the 2 men circling wide. Clara caught a glimpse through the window, dark shapes flitting between the pines, their breath white in the moonlight. Wade, meanwhile, had taken cover behind the corner of the porch, firing toward the rear to pin the older warrior down. "He's moving to the side!" Clara shouted. Chayton nodded sharply, tossing her a small pistol from his belt. "If he comes through, you shoot." The weight of it in her hands was foreign, but steadying. The snow crunched just beyond the wall. Slow, deliberate steps. Clara held her breath, her finger brushing the trigger. Wade stepped into view, gun raised, his eyes locking on hers. Time seemed to slow. She saw the cold intent there, the certainty that she was nothing more than something to reclaim. Then the younger warrior burst from the shadows, tackling Wade into the snow. The revolver went off wild, the shot chewing bark from the porch rail. Chayton leapt from the doorway, driving the butt of his rifle into Wade's ribs. The gun clattered away, and the fight collapsed into a flurry of fists, boots, and breathless curses. Clara held her aim, but didn't fire. Every move happened too fast, too close. Finally, Wade slumped under Chayton's weight, his breath ragged, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. The clearing fell quiet except for the hiss of the wind and the pounding in Clara's ears. Chayton rose, pulling Wade to his feet by the coat collar. "This ends now," he said, his voice low but carrying. Wade only spat into the snow. Chayton's eyes were hard as stone. "Then tomorrow we finish it." The cabin was quiet again, though the air still held the weight of gunpowder and fear. Wade had been shoved back toward the trees, his men half carrying him into the shadows, but his parting glare was a promise. Clara knew he would come again, and not with just a handful of men. Chayton closed the door and slid the bar into place, the younger warrior taking up his watch at the rear window, while the older one stoked the fire. The orange light flickered over Chayton's face, catching the strain at the corners of his eyes. Clara sat at the table, the pistol still in her hands. She'd never held one before tonight, but now the weight of it felt familiar, even necessary. "He'll come with everyone he can buy," she said quietly. Chayton nodded. "By tomorrow's light." His voice was calm, but the tension in his shoulders told her he was calculating every possible move Wade might make. The younger warrior entered, shaking snow from his hair. "Tracks go west," he said in Lakota. Chayton translated for her. "They're heading back to town. He'll spend the night gathering men." Clara's stomach knotted. "Can we hold him off?" Chayton didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a small pouch from his coat, spilling its contents onto the table. Spent cartridges, a handful of fresh ones, and a folded strip of rawhide. He began reloading his rifle with deliberate precision. "We will hold," he said finally, "because we have to." The older warrior handed Clara a steaming cup of broth, and she realized her hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the memory of Wade's eyes. She sipped slowly, letting the warmth steady her. Outside, the snow kept falling, softening the world, but Clara knew it would not be enough to muffle the sound of riders come morning. After a while, Chayton spoke again. "When the sun rises, stay near the back wall. We'll force them into a narrow approach. They can't all rush at once." She met his gaze. "And if they break through," his eyes didn't waver, "then we fight until we can't." The fire crackled, the only sound between them. Clara realized this wasn't just his fight or hers. It was the boy's, too. The child who had vanished into the crowd after she'd taken the lashes. Somehow, word had reached his kin, and now 3 warriors were willing to stand between her and death because of it. As she lay down that night, her back aching and her mind restless, she knew sleep would not come easy. In the stillness, she heard Chayton outside, his voice low in Lakota, speaking to the spirits of the land. And she understood. Come dawn, nothing would be left unsaid. The first light of dawn was thin and gray, the kind of cold that sank into bone. Clara woke to the sound of a low whistle from the younger warrior outside. Chayton was already at the door, rifle in hand, his face carved with focus. The older warrior peered through the rear window, murmuring something in Lakota that needed no translation. "They're here." Clara stepped to the side window and looked down the slope. Wade's men had come in force. At least a dozen riders were fanning out through the snow, their breath steaming, rifles glinting in the pale light. Wade sat tall in the saddle at the center, a red scarf at his throat, and that same smile she'd seen at the trading post. A predator certain of his kill. Chayton stepped onto the porch, his voice carrying steady and clear. "Turn back. This land is not yours, and she is not yours." Wade's laugh echoed against the pines. "That's where you're wrong, friend. She's in debt, and debts get paid." He waved his hand, and his riders spread further, encircling the cabin. Clara could hear them calling to each other, their voices closing in like a tightening noose. The younger warrior returned from the ridge, breath sharp from running. "They'll try the back," Chayton told him, switching to English for Clara's sake. "Hold them until I give the word." Clara's pulse quickened. "What about me?" His eyes met hers. "You stay low, and if they come through, you fight." The first shot came from the tree line, a warning meant to rattle them. The older warrior answered with a crack from his rifle, splintering a pine inches from a rider's head. Men shouted, horses reared, but the circle didn't break. Then Wade's voice cut through the chaos. "We can do this easy, or we can make it ugly." Chayton's reply was quiet, but carried. "It's already ugly." The next volley came without pause, bullets slamming into the logs, glass shattering in the rear window. Clara crouched behind the table, her hands tight around the pistol grip. The noise was deafening, the cabin shuddering with each hit. Snow spilled through the gaps where lead tore the wood. Chayton fired from the doorway, his shots measured, forcing the riders to keep their distance. But Wade wasn't here for a standoff. He was waiting for a crack, for panic. Clara could see it in the way his men inched closer, using the trees as cover. Then, from the far side of the clearing, came the sharp sound of boots breaking snow in a run. Clara's breath caught. They weren't going to wait for the door to break. They were coming in now. The first man burst from the tree line at a sprint, snow spraying at his heels. Behind him, two more followed, their rifles slung, knives gleaming in their fists. Chayton didn't waste a shot. He waited until the lead man was halfway across the clearing, then fired. The attacker dropped hard, rolling lifeless into the drift. The younger warrior met the second head-on, the clash of steel sharp in the frozen air. Clara's hands trembled, the pistol slick with sweat despite the cold. The third man came from the blind side, rushing the porch steps. She moved without thinking, stepping into his path and raising the gun. The crack of the shot split the morning. He crumpled into the snow, shock frozen on his face. For a heartbeat, Clara just stood there, ears ringing, until Chayton's voice snapped her back. "Inside, now!" She scrambled in, ducking as bullets tore splinters from the doorway. Wade's men were closing fast, firing in volleys to keep the warriors pinned. The older warrior at the back loosed two quick shots, dropping another rider, but a return blast shattered the window frame and grazed his arm. He gritted his teeth and kept firing. Then Wade himself charged forward, revolver in hand, his scarf whipping in the wind. "You think 3 of you can stand against 12 of mine?" he bellowed. Chayton stepped into the open, calm as stone. "We only have to stand against 1 of you." The 2 men moved at the same time, Wade firing, Chayton's rifle cracking. Wade's shot went wide, chewing into the porch rail. Chayton's bullet hit true, slamming into Wade's shoulder and spinning him from the saddle. He hit the snow hard, his revolver tumbling from his grasp. The fight faltered as his men hesitated, glancing toward their fallen leader. The younger warrior seized the moment, charging forward with a war cry that echoed off the pines. The riders broke, turning their horses downslope, the crunch of retreating hooves fading into the distance. Clara stepped out slowly, her breath misting in the cold, and saw Wade sprawled in the drift, clutching his wound. Chayton stood over him, the rifle steady in his hands. "You come for her again," he said, voice low but sharp, "and you won't ride away." Wade's eyes flickered with hate, but he said nothing. They left him there, the three warriors and Clara watching from the porch as the last of his men disappeared into the trees. Only when the clearing was empty did Chayton lower his rifle. He looked at Clara, his gaze softer now. "The boy is safe," he said simply. "And so are you." Her throat tightened, but she managed a nod. For the first time since the trading post, the air felt lighter, like the debt had been paid in full.